Tonight's comes from a Sheepish bookseller. Just signed, a Sheepish bookseller. Father Simon and the Angels of Justice. I work for a bookstore, and although as a bookseller it's impossible to have read everything, I always try to stay aware of what's happening. My former boss always said, never claim to have read something you haven't, as you'll get caught out one day. And it won't just be you that looks like an idiot. Very wise words. Sadly, that boss left and was replaced by someone, I'm going to call him John, who didn't share this belief. For me, John was the worst kind of bookseller, one of those who looks down on books and genres that he doesn't like, and the people who read them, and he dismisses them. Sounds like a bit of a snob. Moving on a few months, we're taking part in a local book festival, where an author of young adult fiction, of whom I am a fan, was attending. Our particular event was supposed to be this author being interviewed by another author, and sadly, on the day, the interviewer had to pull out. Maybe he had travel issues. You know how it goes. This led to a bit of a panic about what would happen to the event, so as a fan of this author, I said I would love the opportunity to ask her questions. This might not be as probing as a fellow author, but it would mean that the event would go ahead pretty much as planned. Despite some reluctance, this was felt to be the best option. Now remember that I said John the boss looked down on certain books. Well, young adult fiction, YA fiction, was one such area he had no time for. So it was something of a surprise when, after viewing what our author looked like online, he decided to overrule his original decision and now insisted that he host the event. I have to tell you, there are a number of people who are very snobbish about YA fiction, which proves that they're fools. Okay, just thought I'd mention that one. I think I'm allowed to editorial on that. I don't think that's a controversial view.
You're fine.
John's reasoning was that he had more experience and was better suited to doing it. In fact, he was so suited to doing it in this role that he needed the questions that I had already prepared. And he insisted that I gave him my questions. Don't like the sound of this guy. Now, I had written far more questions than I thought would be needed, and as I'd expected her answers to possibly steer the conversation in different directions, but John still said he needed more, so I wrote some extra questions. Come the event, and it was all going okay, apart from the pace at which John was getting through my questions. Unable to pick up on the interesting aspects that the author was talking about, he was rattling through the questions at a quiz show pace without listening at all to what the author was saying. He looked nervous in front of an audience of our author's admiring fans, and all his bravado had faded away. Well, more fool him. Then I remembered some of the extra questions that I'd written in case the audience Q&A ran short or didn't happen at all. And then suddenly, I looked at John and I just felt pity and anguish. Annoyed at having to write more questions, I had obliged, but let's just say they weren't questions that would be even vaguely usable. John had asked his last question, looked at my notes, saw that it was time to take questions from the audience. He looked up and saw me eagerly trying to get his attention, but he just gave me a little shake of his head and a wry, condescending smile. Any pity I had dissolved at that moment, and I put my hand down and let him get on with it. After only 4 questions from the audience, John decided to start on the extra questions that I had written. He hadn't bothered to look through them before launching into them, as quickly became obvious. Question 1. In your third book, the lead character obviously had quite a lot of trauma in her life. I wondered if you took inspiration from Katie Price's biography. A question guaranteed to provoke the answer, no. A very short and pointed no from our respected author. By now, John is frantically scanning through the rest of the page, trying to find usable questions, but instead he would only have found the following. What's your favourite colour? Can I sniff your hair? How big is your fridge? If you were a cheese, what cheese would you be and why? And at this point in the process, I started writing out the questions from the Monty Python World Forum sketch from Live at Drury Lane. The Hammers is the nickname of which football team? Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov is better known to the world as who? Obviously, West Ham and Lenin in that order. Anyway, the mood had now changed in the room, and our author had gone from being polite and amiable to understandably frosty. John looked like he wanted the ground to open up beneath him so he could escape, but instead he brought the evening to a close and indicated to the audience where to queue for the author's book signing. It was my role to look after the queue and ensure the books were ready for her to sign, and from where I was, I could hear the conversations between her and her fans. Nearly every single one mentioned these questions, and each time her response became less and less polite. Needless to say, I didn't try to engage her in conversation. I don't seek forgiveness from John. He departed not long after, thanks to his own misdemeanours, but not before giving me a disciplinary. I don't seek forgiveness from the author either, as my actions meant I didn't get a chance to talk to her, and I feel that is punishment enough. I do, however, seek forgiveness from her fans, as my actions put her into a bad mood, and the fans unfortunately bore the brunt of it. Well, this is from a sign from a Sheepish bookseller. I think, Joe, we should make a note of these questions, because I think, if we're ever stuck in the future.
I'm going to be asking Tom Grennan about the cheese question. Hopefully he won't be listening right now. But
cheese one. Can I sniff your hair?
How big is your fridge?
How big is your fridge? Is a great question. I think this is really good. Anyway, a Sheepish bookseller getting his own back on a really pompous boss. More power to the Sheepish bookseller, I say. What do you say, Joe?
I say you're not just forgiven, you are applauded, because you were very kind and you handed over your questions, which I would have found very, very difficult to do myself. And I really hope you enjoyed the squirming and the humiliation of your very dodgy boss. I think the fans would completely have understood if they knew your predicament and the kind of person that you were. So how dare he give you a disciplinary as well? It's just outrageous. So I think the fans would understand, yes. And they wouldn't mind in the slightest. So, absolutely forgiven.
And John the boss only saying he'd step up to the mark and ask the question just because he Googled what she looked like. Anyway, Bobby, what do you say here?
I'm with Joe almost all the way, except I can't forgive you, because this is the thing, I understand John was a nightmare boss, and I absolutely feel for you. And handing over, we've all done work we've had to hand over to someone else. It just feels just completely gutting. However, let's face it, it's the author that was the victim, really, because it was meant to be her night with her guests, with her readers, and she didn't really get the best chance. And what Sheepish bookseller didn't do is help that. He compounded that. John could have done it enough, but you didn't help. So I'm thinking that you put her at risk, and I don't think she deserved that.
How big is your fridge, by the way?
It's quite big.
Okay, that's
fine. And a freezer. There
Mine's
you go.
Not big enough.
Well. No,
never big enough.
Big enough. So I'm going to say on this that you were Sheepish bookseller. I'm not going to forgive you, because basically she was the victim, not really John.
Right. People's verdict, please. Do you forgive Sheepish bookseller or not? On the text 88291, it's the people's verdict.
Do we know which author it was? Is it that one?
Well, we have a guess. I don't think it was that one.